Hello and welcome to episode 28 of the Low Back Pain Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Grant Elliott with RehabFix online low back program. And today's topic is, should you stretch your hamstrings? Is stretching a waste of time? Are your tight hamstrings related to your low back pain? And we're going to dive into some cool studies in regards to how you can improve hamstring flexibility and reduce rates of injury. Last episode 27, we discussed a lateral disc bulge or disc herniation, how you can self-diagnose this in some initial stages that you can work through to begin to find some relief and start to put a strategy together. If you have ever been shifted to a side or seen someone who is shifted where their hips and their upper body do not align, that may be a lateral disc herniation. So if that interests you, be sure to go listen to episode 27. But today's topic is stretching, hamstring stretching, low back pain, how to improve your hamstrings and things like that. Because so many people feel, I got tight hammies. Tight hammies. That's the reason I have low back pain. Off the bat, that is not true. Tight hamstrings is not the reason you have low back pain. It's just simply not. A lot of people will say, but if you have tight hamstrings, it's, your hamstrings connect to your pelvis. Your pelvis is going to rotate and pull pressure on your low back. No. It's not what's happening. It's like individuals who say you have a weak core and that's why your low back hurts. That's not true. That's not true either. Can doing core related movements help improve your core function? Sure, that can help. It's not because you have a weak core. Can doing hamstring-related movements help? Sure. It's not because you have tight hamstrings. Okay, it could be because you're just exercising in general. So I want to make this clear. Let's say you have an, overweight, inactive individual who has not really moved or stretched their body or done any mobility work for years, they're probably going to develop low back issues. And then they go and see a provider and they say, it's because you have tight hamstrings, right? Everyone's told that. And so they start stretching their hamstrings. Well, this person hasn't even stretched a day in their life, okay? They get no hip mobility. They get no low back mobility. They get no shoulder mobility. They get nothing, okay? They're not moving. They start stretching their hamstrings, AKA they start moving their body. And hey, they feel a little bit better. So they were right. It's because of my tight hamstrings. I stretched my hamstrings. They're looser now. My body feels better. My low back is better. So the reason I had low back pain was because I had tight hamstrings. No. You see what I mean? Correlation versus causation. If you take someone who's doing nothing and they start doing something, they're probably going to be better. Okay? So just consider that first off. Now, stretching a waste of time. Throughout the last decade, there have been numerous studies actually showing that stretching, for the most part, static stretching specifically is our discussion, is a waste of time. There were multiple studies that showed that it does not do anything for prevention of injuries. Static stretching does not do anything for performance, for force output. In fact, it can actually have a negative impact. There was one study, I believe it was in 2015. I think it was 2015. What they did is they had individuals statically stretch their hamstrings and just their legs in general, and then perform a vertical jump. And then they had them another time in another group not stretch at all, perform a vertical jump, and the individuals who did no stretching versus static stretching actually performed better. So static stretching before that event reduced their performance. And so the last decade, the narrative is sort of become, the evidence-based narrative has become, static stretching really isn't useful for much. It can actually detract from your performance. It ain't that great. And that's sort of what I've preached, okay? But however, today we're going to discuss a new systematic review, 2021. I'll attach it in the show notes. And it was a systematic review for strength training versus stretching for improving range of motion. And essentially what they found is no difference. I'm just going to cut to the chase. Not much of a difference. Stretching your hamstrings will improve some temporary, short-term range of motion if you do it over and over and over for a long period of time. Your nervous system, its tolerance to stretch, the nerve's tolerance to stretch will improve. You're not lengthening a muscle. People think, oh, tight muscle, you got to lengthen it. No, you're not lengthening it. You're improving the muscle's tolerance to stretch is what you're doing. But they will see some benefit doing that, but they will see equal benefit strengthening their hamstrings. So let me ask you this. If you get an equal amount of range of motion, let's just say everything's the same, okay, in regarding improvements in range of motion from statically stretching your hamstrings, sitting there bending forward for 5 minutes, stretching your hamstrings, or doing a hamstring strengthening exercise, which one do you think is going to be better for you overall? Stretching your hamstrings or strengthening your hamstrings if the outcome is the same? Strengthening your hamstrings, right? The question is, would you rather get strong or not get strong? Range of motion is the same. Outcome's the same. You're going to get more flexible. But would you rather also get strong or not get strong? Get strong. All day long. Get strong. Right? That's going to improve the muscle's resiliency, the muscle size, strength of the tendons, the joints, ligaments, everything. Get strong if the outcome's the same. So then the discussion becomes, what strengthening exercises? All right, let's prioritize some that would be the best to kill multiple birds with one stone. Not that I condone animal cruelty in any way. But the kind of exercises that tend to induce the most amount of stretch on the hamstrings that are also strengthening them are going to be eccentric based movements. Exercises with an emphasis on the eccentric force would be Romanian deadlifts, slowly lowering the bar to the ground. If you're not familiar with Romanian deadlifts, essentially you're standing with the barbell or a weight implement of any kind, hinging and slowly lowering that weight to the ground and then coming back up. You could also do hamstring sliders, but the one I wanted to focus on and emphasize today is the Nordic hamstring curl. The Nordic hamstring curl is basically purely a eccentric force unless the individual is strong enough to pull themselves back up. I'll do my best describing this to the audio listeners. Essentially, you are in a kneeling position. Imagine you're kneeling, standing up, or kneeling upright, rather. Both knees on the ground, feet behind you. You're kneeling up tall. Imagine someone comes behind you and holds your ankles down to the ground. You try to remain as upright as possible as you lower yourself straight as a plank of wood down to the floor, really, really slowly, feeling a huge stretch on the hamstrings. And then typically individuals will push with their hands, push themselves back up or pull themselves back up in a particular fashion, and then repeat the eccentric, the lowering phase again. So with this particular exercise, they did a large study with, it was 956 soccer players to assess hamstring strains. They found that by implementing a program based around the Nordic hamstring curl, or a eccentric hamstring exercise, that there is a 65% injury reduction for hamstring strain and an 85% re-injury reduction. That's huge for reducing hamstring strains. Now, I know that this podcast is typically focused on low back issues. I'm talking about hamstring strains right now, right? The way that this relates to the low back is, once again, individuals who are, falsely misled to assume that their low back pain is from tight hamstrings. You don't need to lengthen or loosen your hamstrings for low back pain. That is a fallacy. And then from there we go to, okay, well, maybe you do want to strengthen, or rather you do want to stretch your hamstrings to improve the flexibility, but you can get more from strengthening them because you will still improve the flexibility and mobility component while also doing an exercise, getting the benefits of exercise while still improving the range of motion. And then also, what kind of exercise would be the best ones for the most optimal outcome? Eccentric movements such as the Nordic hamstring curl. That's kind of the path that we followed so far. So inducing that eccentric force on the hamstrings helps prevent these injuries because of the contractile force it has on the tissue. They found that a majority of hamstring strains occur upon the initiation of an eccentric force. So the example would be someone is sprinting, their leg is outstretched, they're about to plant on the forward foot, their heel comes in contact with the ground, getting ready to pull themselves forward for another stride. And upon contact with the ground, that is a peak eccentric force. That's typically when hamstring strains occur. So these Nordic hamstring curls or any other eccentric hamstring exercises will load that eccentric force, strengthen your hamstrings with an eccentric force, and help reduce chances of hamstring strains, hamstring injuries. Also, exercising in general is just good for us. These particular hamstring exercises will help improve hamstring range of motion, hamstring flexibility. For those of you who have tight hamstrings out there that are looking to improve that, that will then make you feel better without having to statically stretch them for not as much help. And then that may, in turn, help you feel more mobile overall. Will that affect your low back? Possibly, because you're just improving your mobility. But it will also set you up for success in regards to better ways to improve the way your hamstrings feel, because a lot of individuals with low back issues also have tight hamstrings. It's usually because the low back is telling the hamstrings to be tight, though. But by loading them and improving their mobility through these patterns, that can just make them feel generally better to you as you are rehabbing the low back and reducing the nerve tension through the hamstrings and things of that nature. So the summary of today's podcast is you do not have low back pain because your hamstrings are tight. That is not the reason why. But if you want to improve your hamstrings, I probably wouldn't do any static stretching because you can get just as much in regards to flexibility out of strength training. So let's get stronger. And then if you are going to do strength training, let's focus on some eccentric movements like the Nordic hamstring curl. Boom. There's your application to improve your hamstring flexibility, to get stronger, and help address those tight hammies, while of course finding the right plan for your low back specific issue, which will also improve your hamstring flexibility once we get that under control. Because many individuals, as I said earlier, with low back issues that are causing either disc referral or sciatic nerve referral through those hamstrings, it'll lock them up. If you have sciatica, you know that if you try to bend over to touch your toes, one hamstring or one calf will feel tighter than the other side. It's because it's telling those muscles to lock up. So we got to address the low back, resolve those nerve issues, resolve the disc issue, resolve the low back issue, and then you can also implement these hamstring interventions alongside that to begin working locally on those tissues. So if you have been stretching your hamstrings nonstop, you might actually notice that you could potentially be making your low back worse or your sciatica worse. That is quite common. If you aren't dealing with low back issues necessarily, but you do have tight hamstrings, then begin implementing these eccentric hamstring movements such as hamstring sliders or the Nordic hamstring curl. Be sure to look that up and implement that appropriately. And if you feel like your hamstrings are tight and it's, painful to do hamstring stretches and it's painful to do hamstring exercises or what have you, shoot me a message, submit an application, let me help you. You and I can work one-on-one together no matter where you are in the world and put all these puzzle pieces together in the right format to get you the help and the results that you deserve. And this link will be in the show notes, so you can simply just click the link below, go to that application page and get that in. The sooner you get that in, the sooner we can get started. And finally, if you enjoyed this episode, if you learned something from it, please leave a 5-star rating if you feel that I deserve it and a review, so that we can help get more attraction to this podcast and we can help spread it and more individuals can find it who are looking for health advice, low back advice, stretching advice. And if you're watching on YouTube, please like, comment, and subscribe to help boost this in the algorithm so we can continue to grow the podcast as well. Thank you so much for listening and have a great day.